Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 19739 in the name of Marie Goujon on supporting Scotland's fishing industry. I would ask those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Cabinet Secretary Marie Goujon to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 11 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate is an opportunity to set out Scotland's approach to this year's fisheries negotiations and the setting of fishing opportunities for the year ahead. It also is a chance to recognise the economic, social and cultural importance of fishing to Scotland, acknowledging the challenges and reaffirming our commitment to supporting our fishing industry. Despite the current pressures, the fishing industry remains resilient, sustaining many coastal and island communities. In 2024, Scottish vessels landed 561,000 tonnes of sea fish and shellfish worth £756 million, the highest value in tonnage in a decade. We must also recognise the wider seafood supply chain, our ports, hauliers and many onshore businesses, including processors, that supply quality seafood to domestic and export markets, supporting thousands of jobs. Now, we also know the sector faces challenges, such as the increasing demands on our seas and the uncertainty facing businesses. What is clear is that for decades, our fishing communities have been let down by successive UK governments. The previous UK Conservative government Brexit deal fell far short of promised quota increases and created trade barriers, harming competitiveness and worsening labour shortages. And to compound matters, in May, we were landed with a trade and cooperation agreement by the UK Labour government that extended fisheries access to 2038. Now, while I welcome aspects of the wider deal, such as those that hope to reduce costs and delays for seafood exports, the fact is the Fisheries Access Agreement falls well short for the fishing industry. Yes, I will.
Douglas Ross.
The Cabinet Secretary is speaking a lot about other party policies on fishing. Can she confirm it is still SNP policy to rejoin the European Union and the Common Fisheries Policy?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm sure that all members across this chamber are well aware of my party and my government's position that was set out in a series of published papers that set out that Scotland, when we become an independent country, will rejoin the EU, where we will be a key player in our marine environment and represent our fisheries sector, unlike the other parties in this chamber. Now, the agreement, as I was talking about, it should be noted that was reached between the UK Labour government and the EU with no discussion whatsoever with either Scottish industry or the Scottish Government. But it gets worse, Presiding Officer. Members present today will be aware of the recent UK Government's announcement that they intend to allocate just £28 million of the £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund to Scotland is nothing short of insulting to our vital fishing industry and coastal communities. The UK Government must reconsider its approach and enter into discussions with devolved governments and fishing industry leaders to agree a way forward which treats our industries and communities with the respect they deserve. The Scottish fishing sector accounts for over 60% of the UK's fishing capacity in seafood exports, and more than 75% of all UK quota species are landed by Scottish vessels. To give Scotland a meagre 7.78% of the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund confirms they simply don't care about our fishing industry. Now, I wrote to UK ministers on Wednesday, the 22nd of October, setting out our serious concerns with the announced approach. There's been no reply to my letter. Our position is shared by key Scottish stakeholders who have jointly written to the UK Government, calling for the Scottish Seafood Industry Action Group to be reconvened to discuss this urgent issue alongside other concerns. Now, I've written to the UK Government echoing these calls and asking for the Action Group to be reconvened urgently, but again, I've received no response. Isn't it ironic that a group established to deal with the difficulties the sector faced from EU exit is once again being called to meet in light of UK Government choices? Now, in contrast, Presiding Officer, this Government will continue to do all it can within the powers we have to support the fishing industry and coastal communities. Now, we have a strong record of supporting our marine sectors through our Marine Fund Scotland. Since its launch in 2021, the fund has awarded over £70 million in grants to 390 projects, enabling over £150 million of investment. We can do so much more, but that requires Westminster to listen and act upon industry calls for a fair funding settlement. When we look to our fisheries management strategy, it's driving innovation and sustainability through measures such as remote electronic monitoring, vessel tracking and the future catching policy. We're also working towards more sustainable inshore fisheries through our Inshore Fisheries Management Improvement Programme. We want to develop an agile framework for managing our complex inshore fisheries, one that is more flexible to changing needs of the marine environment and our fishers, and one that can more easily deliver regionally distinct fisheries management measures. Scottish seafood remains amongst the best in the world, and strengthening the role that it plays in the global market is a key shared goal for government and industry alike. Scotland's fisheries are already heavily regulated, with measures such as quotas, effort controls and technical measures providing a platform for fishing to operate responsibly and sustainably. Scotland's fishers understand better than anyone the importance of safeguarding our seas for future generations. Their dedication, expertise and innovation is pivotal in delivering sustainable fishing and a healthy marine environment both now and into the future. Now, I understand the challenges facing the fishing industry and concerns regarding the increasing pressure on marine space, including from offshore wind. Now, this government has a fundamental role to play in managing the marine space and ensuring the interests of all marine users, including our valued fishing sector, are properly considered. Our sectoral planning process for offshore wind seeks to avoid or minimise negative interactions between offshore wind development, the environment and other marine sectors such as fishing. It's vitally important we continue to take an evidence-based approach and continue to work together across all sectors to manage our marine space effectively to ensure that the fishing industry can continue to thrive. Yes, I will.
Finlay Carson.
Given away, but can you answer the question, why has the Scottish Government defunded the Marine Directorate, which limits their ability to do the data collection that's required, but also prevents them from looking at future fisheries like the cockle fishery on the Solway?
Cabinet Secretary.
There's a few points in there on which I have been engaging with Finlay Carson, but he'll also be aware that there was an increase, if he's referring to the science budget of the Marine Directorate earlier this year. Now, we've reflected many times on the partnership work that's needed to deliver effective fisheries and marine management. Our collaborative approach has worked well for the development of fisheries management measures for offshore MPAs, where we have taken a balanced and pragmatic approach. That collaboration is always important, but never more so than when we're facing difficult challenges and choices. Now, in my time as Fisheries Minister, I've seen the resilience that the fishing industry has displayed in the face of unprecedented challenges and recent periods of upheaval and uncertainty, and our industry is facing a very challenging year ahead. There is no getting away from the challenging advice we have across the North East Atlantic and a range of species where substantial cuts are proposed by ICES that, if enacted, will have far-reaching social and economic impacts on our fishermen and processors. And I've already expressed these concerns to DEFRA ministers. ICES advice is challenging for a number of our key stocks this year, not least the iconic stocks of cod and mackerel. There are many factors that might be contributing to this, such as natural mortality, climate impacts and low recruitment across the North East Atlantic. Our stocks are jointly managed with the fishing nations around us, with total allowable catches agreed annually, varying year to year based on science. So change isn't unusual, but it's the scale that makes this feel different on so many levels. Fish stocks are oblivious to lines on maps, and it's crucial that the UK works with its coastal state partners to find joint solutions that ensure the sustainability of both of our fish stocks and our catching and processing sectors. And negotiations on 2026 fishing opportunities are already well underway, and I'm in regular contact with our negotiators as they work to represent and promote Scottish interests. But I'd like to spend a bit of time outlining my objectives for mackerel and cod. North Sea cod is not collapsing, but if we don't proceed with equal attention to biomass recovery and TAC constraints across a number of stocks found in the same fishery, then we will be risking the viability of Scottish whitefish vessels. The ICES advice shows a stark picture of the health of the southern substock, and this is primarily what is driving down the overall advice. ICES is attempting to manage the whole northern shelf stock based on the depleted state of the southern stock. And it's my view that the priority in these negotiations must be the immediate implementation of spatial management measures that restrict potential catches of that southern stock. We already have significant measures in place in Scottish waters, and we will urgently review these to see what, if any, improvements can be made. The Scottish Government's economic analysis shows that a 50% reduction in northern shelf cod quota could see an estimated reduction in landed value of between £19 and £21.5 million to Scottish fishers. 303 Scottish vessels are included in this analysis, of which 35 vessels saw northern shelf cod worth an average of 25% of their total landed value per vessel. If historic fishing patterns continue, it's estimated that 40% of those vessels would be expected not to make a profit next year. This is also an important species for the onshore sector, with northern shelf cod making up more than 5% of the total landed value for Kinlochbervie, Peterhead, Scrabster and Shetland. advocating for an alternative to the headline advice that should still deliver an improvement in the biomass and delivering a sufficient quota for the North Sea and West of Scotland is a sensible and precautionary approach and one of our top priorities. For our pelagic sector, and in particular the mackerel fishery, my officials are exploring a significant package of measures, again focused on delivering a positive impact on stock biomass, as well as real progress towards a more comprehensive sharing agreement between partners, which has been sadly lacking and inevitably has been a contributing factor to this advice. Now is the time to make real progress on mackerel shares and stop the unilateral actions and subsequent overfishing. Now, regardless of any actions we can successfully deliver, we will still be in unprecedented territory for attack being set for 2026, well below anything we have seen on advice sheets at least since 1987. These impacts will be felt across the sector, but by none more than our onshore processors. Between 2020 and 2023, mackerel accounted for around 1/3 of the total tonnage and 1/4 of the total landed value landed into Scotland by the Scottish fleet. The 4 major mackerel processing businesses in Scotland employed over 300 people in production and operations alone in 2023. Many pelagic processing jobs could be at risk and impacts felt throughout the sector if appropriate action is not taken. And it's for this reason that I'm urgently looking at what, if any, other measures I can take as Cabinet Secretary to support the onshore processing sector. These are significant challenges for our pelagic and demersal sector, but with the enormously constructive input from fishing representatives and my committed team of negotiators,
Cabinet Secretary is concluding.
We hope to deliver the best outcome possible for Scotland. Presiding Officer, these are uncertain times for our fishing industry and the wider seafood sector. The negotiations are challenging, but I can assure you we will work collaboratively with international partners to secure the best outcome for Scotland. This SNP government will continue to stand, as it always has done, with our coastal communities and support a thriving, modern and sustainable fishing industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Could you please move the motion?
I move the motion.
And I now call on Tomigo to speak to and move Amendment 19739.2. Up to 7 minutes, please.
I move the amendment in my name. Presiding Officer, thank you. And let me begin by thanking the Cabinet Secretary for bringing this debate on fishing. I have been asking for this for quite some time. Indeed, I issued a press release months ago urging the Parliament to confront head-on both the challenges and the future of our fishing industry. I am therefore grateful that today we dedicate our time to a sector that is woven into the fabric of who we are as a nation. Because fishing is not merely an industry. Generations have built their lives around the sea, and the sea has shaped the communities they call home. And as we acknowledge that cultural importance, we must also acknowledge the cost. Many here will know families who have lost loved ones at sea, brave men and women taken far too soon. Their sacrifice reminds us that fishing is not a statistic or a policy area. It is a way of life carried by people whose courage underpins the prosperity of our coastal Scotland. Yet despite this, our fishing industry is today under immense economic strain. Scotland has been awarded just £28 million from the UK's new £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. That is 7.78% of the total. Yet we account for almost half the fishing jobs in the UK. Our Scottish registered vessels contribute over 60% of the value of all UK landings. The arithmetic speaks for itself. This allocation is not just inadequate, it is fundamentally unfair. I welcome that the Cabinet Secretary has raised this in her motion, which we will support that part of, and I hope she will support our amendment, which I will come to later. Because at the moment, £2.3 million to support our coastal communities each year, renew fleets, back innovation and invest in the next generation of fishermen does not come close enough. Perhaps Labour colleagues will bring us some good news that Westminster have heard Scotland's call, and they will bring with them a better, fairer offer. But funding is only part of the challenge. Out at sea, another pressure is growing, and growing fast: spatial squeeze. This is a term many people outside the industry have never heard, yet its consequences will be felt across Scotland. Spatial squeeze happens when competing maritime uses, wind farms, marine protected areas, new cables and pipelines tighten the space in which our fishermen can operate. The Scottish Fishermen's Federation has been crystal clear. Continued development at the current rate could displace fishing effort to such an extent that the remaining grounds simply cannot absorb the loss. A joint study by the NFFO and the SFF outlines scenarios where the expansion of offshore renewables leads to major reductions in fishing output and substantial job losses, not only on vessels, but across the entire coastal communities that depend on them. This is not a theoretical concern. Time and again, marine planning decisions proceed without meaningful engagement with those who depend on the sea for their livelihood. Perhaps in closing, the government could help me understand why there is not fuller discussions with the industry about fair compensation. I want to acknowledge some of the individuals who have helped shine a light on these issues, people who have spent decades advocating for the industry, pushing it forward and ensuring its stories are heard. People like Peter Smith of Bucky, an innovator whose adventures aboard the Victory are known in communities across the country. Jim Cowie in Caithness, a merchant, processor, auctioneer, restaurateur and now podcast host, whose passion for Scottish seafood has never dimmed. Jimmy Buchan, who needs no introduction and whose lifelong dedication to the sector is felt from the deck of the boat to the halls of government. And people like Hans Uncles, whose electric boat, the Lorna Jane, shows what innovation in the fleet can truly look like. There are more, of course, that I could name, not least the incredible duo of ex-skipper and industry stalwart Ian Gatt and SSF Chief Executive Elspeth MacDonald, who I believe are up in the gallery today. Fishermen have highlighted concerns over the relationship between UK and EU vessels in Scottish waters, where rules are not being enforced properly, and that our own fishermen are losing out because of it. They see rules applied lightly for others and heavily for us, as they see the consequences of the 12-year deal that allows EU access to UK waters. Many in Scotland's fleet believe that that deal undermined our negotiating position and their economic future. For them, it was a moment of deep frustration. Now, turning to our whitefish or demersal sector, we face another crisis, the IC's zero catch advice for northern shelf cod. Industry leaders have called this outrageous. The Shetland Fishermen's Association described it as fleet-ending madness, and they are right to raise the alarm. Because cod, haddock, whiting and other species are caught together in mixed fisheries. You cannot simply legislate cod out of the net. It is impossible to eliminate cod bycatch while still catching other species, and that means a blanket ban is not only unworkable, it is potentially devastating. What we need is a smarter, more nuanced, evidence-based approach. Our pelagic fleet faces its own pressures. Cuts to key quotas, especially for mackerel, are projected to hit hard from 2026 onwards. These cuts will not just impact the catching sector, they will hit processors, hauliers and the many coastal businesses that rely on the fleet's success. But I caution the government that changes to the economic link requirements are not the right answer. This is why it is vital that the fishing industry is properly listened to, not as an observer, not as a stakeholder, but as a primary partner. Now, I want to highlight one positive and forward-looking initiative, the Clyde Vision. The strategy provides a comprehensive vision for investment, sustainability and growth in the inshore sector in the Clyde region. It deserves to be taken seriously in government planning, not just as a document, but as a roadmap for real, meaningful development. Because when we speak about fishing, we must remember the wider picture. This is an industry that supports thousands of jobs, contributes millions to our economy, or anchors remote and island communities and plays a critical role in our domestic food security. It also contributes to the stewardship of our marine environment. Responsible fishing and healthy seas must go hand in hand. We need to reaffirm, not just in words but in action, our commitment to protecting livelihoods, safeguarding food security and ensuring that fishermen, not distant bureaucracies or competing commercial pressures, are placed at the centre of decision-making. Now, finally, I want to turn to the Murray Flow Park. Last week, hundreds of people, over 600, came to my public meeting in Findhorn and Nairn. Their message was simple. They are not opposed to progress, but they want development done properly, at the right time, in the right place, and with genuine consideration for livelihoods and local ecology. Many fishermen in Murray feel misled and overlooked. Some have invested heavily to diversify their businesses, to build resilience, to create jobs, yet they are being asked to sacrifice everything for projects that appear rushed, poorly sited and lacking proper engagement. The proposed location for the Murray Flow Park covers several protected areas, sits close to a Ramsar site and lies adjacent to a nature reserve. These are not minor details, they are significant concerns. Our motion today accepts the SNP's wording on fishing, but I ask all parties, will you stand with us in sending a clear, united message that developments like Murray Flow Park must not proceed in the wrong place at the wrong time? Because the message from local people was loud, clear and heartfelt, and ignoring it would be an abdication of our responsibility. Presiding Officer, Scottish fishing is more than an industry, it is a heritage, it is a community, it is the backbone of our coastal identity. But today that future is under threat. Unfair funding decisions, from spatial squeeze, from harsh quota cuts and from policies that fail to grasp the realities of life at sea. We must be able to deliver a proper long-term future that fishermen deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rigo. I now call on Roger Grant to speak to Move Amendment 19739.3. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to start by paying tribute to our fishing industry. It's a dangerous industry. It delivers us food security and also economic value in Scotland. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government used this debate to complain about the allocation of the Fishing and Coastal Fund, but it was devolved at their request. And when making this request, they knew that the only mechanism to devolve funding is through the Barnett formula, which means they knew the proportion of the fund that would come to Scotland. In the full knowledge of the larger Scottish fishing industry, they should have looked and spoken to, they should have looked at a UK-wide fund, and they should have spoken to the UK government and at least tried to negotiate a different mechanism to devolve the funding before they agreed to have that funding devolved. Torquil Crichton, MSP for the Western Isles, has asked DEFRA to look at that methodology again. And this is what the Scottish Government should have done before they asked for the funding to devolve. It's late in the day for the Scottish Government to make the same request that they should have done before asking for the funding to be devolved. Neither is it clear that what the Scottish Government will do with the funding. Will it be added to the Marine Scotland Fund, or will it be used differently? The Liberal Democrat amendment to this debate suggests the Scottish Government should practice what they preach and provide a greater share of the fishing funding to Shetland. Shetland accounts for 19% of the fish landed in Scotland, but it has only received 6%. It has only received 6% of the latest Marine Scotland Fund award.
Finlay Carson.
Much appreciate Rhoda Grant giving away, and I understand how passionate she is about fishing communities, but does Rhoda Grant believe that a reduction from 46% of the fisheries funding down to a mere 7.78, does she believe that's fair?
Rhoda Grant.
I'm certainly not arguing it's fair. What I'm arguing is the Scottish Government should have agreed a mechanism for devolving that funding. Either that, or she should have agreed for a UK-wide funding, which would have allowed our fishers to get a fair amount of the funding. Now, the Scottish Government also has money within its budget to increase the funds that they offer our fishing industry. Presiding Officer, we also need to look at how we access quota and how we manage it differently. Current fishing boat owners own licences and they own quotas, and it's theirs to do with as they wish. They can leave the industry but still control it. They can sell their quota and licences to the highest bidder, regardless of who that is or where they live. Therefore, any new quota should be leased in the public interest, not sold to the highest bidder. We should also build on the Shetland model, where quota is owned by the community and then leased to those who live locally and land their catch in Shetland. Orkney Council and Colleen and Neil and Shear also do this with prawn quota. This gives the council the ability to manage their fisheries in a way that benefits their local economies. The UK Fisheries Act 2020 states that quota is a public asset and requires Scottish ministers to allocate it using transparent and objective criteria. That criteria should include environmental, social and economic factors. This is not happening, and I am again sorry that the Cabinet Secretary has not used this debate to tell us what steps the Scottish Government are taking to do this. We're also concerned about the other pressures on the fishing industry. We're all aware of the scandal of ScotWind and how a ceiling was set for bids to develop renewable projects. What is also concerning is these sites were auctioned without discussion with the fishing industry. All the briefings we've had for this debate, and despite there being diverging views on a number of things, all those people agree that there is an urgent need for spatial planning, and that simply is not happening. I need to make progress. And it's not just wind turbines, it's interconnectors, it's telecommunication cables, it's fish farming. The list goes on. Indeed, the Conservatives in their own amendment are alluding to some of the pressures that come on our marine environment. There must be a plan to ensure that we don't have conflict and tensions between industries, and I look forward to hearing what the Cabinet Secretary has to tell us about that in her summing up. She also spoke about her concerns about fishing opportunities next year, with total allowable catch reductions on the horizon. So I hope that she will address the science we base our fishing catches upon. Again, this year we see discrepancies between what the industry believes and what the science is telling us, and has long been a bone of contention. When the Rural and Islands Committee visited the Marine Laboratory in Aberdeen earlier this year, we were shocked to see the conditions in which our scientists work. The accommodation was dire. Some of the equipment was warehoused in other institutions. Their lecture theatre was a storage room. I was amazed they were able to work at all. Presiding Officer, there are many things we should be debating and putting in place to ensure our fishing industry thrives. Sadly, this debate is used by the Scottish Government to blame someone else, to avoid scrutiny of their own mismanagement. Scotland needs a new government that will work with the industry and put in place structures that allows it to thrive, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Ms Grant. I now call on Ariane Burgess to speak to and move Amendment 19739.1. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a representative of hundreds of coastal communities across the Highlands and Islands, I wholeheartedly share the Scottish Government's condemnation of the allocation Scotland has received through the UK Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. This fund is meant to improve technology and equipment, both of which will be essential if we're to make fishing more sustainable and better regulated, and provide certainty to fishers so that they can operate with confidence. This fund is also meant to train the next generation of fishers and support coastal communities, two crucial goals that will stop depopulation and keep communities thriving. So it's insulting to my constituents that despite accounting for almost two-thirds of catches and exports, and despite Scotland holding roughly 60% of UK waters, our nation is getting less than 8% of this £360 million funding. To me, this says two things. Yes.
Finlay Carson.
Is it correct that given some of the amendments that the Green Party have planned to bring forward in the National Environment Bill, that Scotland won't need the 46% of funding because they'll absolutely decimate fishing in Scotland? That's inshore and offshore.
Ariane Burgess.
I don't think this is a topic of this debate. So the UK settlement, to me, says two things. One, that the UK government would rather support industrial, long-distance fleets operating out of Grimsby, which have super-wealthy owners and little regard for health of fish stocks, instead of smaller operators in towns and villages across Scotland who brave rough seas in all weathers to make a living and provide the exports that this Brexit-supporting UK government is so reliant on in its quest for economic growth. It also tells us once again that Scotland is an afterthought for politicians and officials in Westminster by denying them their fair share of this funding pot. Keir Starmer's government is actively betraying Scotland's coastal and island communities. While I hope this debate today provides reassurance to these communities that the Scottish Parliament and the Government have their backs, and also secures a rapid U-turn from the UK Government, we're once again being shown that the only way that Scotland can get fair treatment, the only way its businesses can operate with confidence, the only way it can properly plan for its future is by becoming the independent nation it is so capable of being. Scottish Greens amendments I need to make progress. The Scottish Greens amendment to the Scottish Government's motion seeks to reflect another aspect of fairness that must be addressed, namely the need for spatial management for fishing, which would relieve the severe pressure on all fishers, as well as our marine environment. We need a system that allows us to identify areas where we should or shouldn't fish, which fully adheres to the science and comes with strong local input. We also must look at how we can better support low-impact fishing, which will die out if we continue to allow trawlers to operate pretty much anywhere they please, or if bad actors continue to be able to factor paltry fines into their business plans. While I wholeheartedly agree with a lot of what the Scottish Government is saying today, there's one element of its motion that I believe needs clarity, reflection and pause, and that's the reference to the challenging advice on key stocks. You could choose to read this two ways. On the one hand, you could argue that the advice is indeed challenging. Cod and mackerel are on the precipice, not just because of overfishing, but also because of bycatch. The actual level of cod mortality has been estimated by the UK Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science as being 62% higher than quota limits in recent years. To allow it to regenerate, cod shouldn't be fished unless safeguards are introduced. For example, quotas should have a higher bar for eligibility to ensure that the stock can recover. This is a challenging situation for fishers who rely on cod, but it's a challenging situation that we find ourselves in because the science hasn't been enforced strongly enough in regulations. The second way that you could read the challenging advice line is more problematic. And as I heard from the Cabinet Secretary, I think that it isn't intended this way. These two words could be read as saying the advice is challenging because it's frustrating the aims of the fishing industry. I could choose to be cynical here, given that the Marine Directorate has repeatedly shown itself to be more inclined to follow the economics than the science. So is this government science-led or not? Being science-led is important for the sake of fish and coastal communities that live off them. Yes, fishers are getting scientific advice that runs counter to their aims, but this advice is crucial if there are going to be any fish to catch in the future. So although I completely sympathise with those in the industry who find the science frustrating, we must look at it through this long-term lens and view it as a form of insurance for coastal communities of the future. So can I ask that the Cabinet Secretary give priority to the low-impact fleet during the allocation of the Coastal Fishing Growth Fund? Turning to other amendments, I agree with Beatrice Wishart that the Scottish Government must provide guarantees that it will distribute the funding it has received in a proportionate manner. And it's good to see Rhoda Grant is also raising the point about space-based planning and investing in marine science. Where I can't support the Labour amendment is where it points the finger at the Scottish Government, and reading between the lines, it appears to be suggesting that the Scottish fishers and coastal communities are being punished because the Scottish Government didn't negotiate in the way that the UK Government wanted. That's not constructive, inclusive leadership. And finally, to Tim Eagle's amendment, certainly it reflects the unease I'm hearing from constituents about the Murray Flow Park, and I sympathise with his amendment, but I feel that the plans are at such an early stage that we can't yet say what the impact on local fishing will be to the sector.
Thank you, Ms Burgess. And could I ask you to move your amendment, please?
I move the amendment.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Beatrice Wishart to speak to and to move Amendment 19739.4. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has brought a fishing debate to the Chamber. This follows my members' debate in February, which was the first fishing debate in Holyrood for some time. There are stakeholders in the public gallery today who are listening keenly to the debate, and they are very welcome. And their presence underlines the importance and necessity of regular fisheries debates in this place. Fishermen have a direct interest in sustainable management of the seas, and the Scottish Government should be doing all it can to support them and the wider onshore industry. Our fishing fleets face difficult circumstances, and it is vital that the catching and processing sectors work together to ensure there is a future. Let us not forget what fishermen are doing in often dangerous weather. It's about providing healthy, high-protein food. There are suggestions of a 77% reduction to mackerel catches and a call for a zero total allowable catch for cod, which would see the end of many whitefish vessels. It's also been suggested that the Scottish Government's economic link policy, which requires the pelagic fleet to land 55% of their herring and mackerel quota into Scotland, be increased. That would be devastating for the Scottish pelagic fleet, which is made up of 21 family-owned vessels. Meanwhile, the fleet miss out on potentially better value from landings elsewhere, and without some of our vessels, the wider supply chain, infrastructure and economy will all be impacted. In my constituency, Shetland, any loss of pelagic vessels would affect the whole economic system and infrastructure built around it. The fish market, the marine engineering companies, the hauliers, ferriers, and even the grocery stores and butchers who provide food for cruise meals would all feel the negative impact of any fleet reduction. And there would be consequences for the whitefish fleet and the 200 or so under 10-metre vessels. Presiding Officer, the Liberal Democrat amendment calls for proportionate allocation of funding. As the Scottish Government motion states, the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund that will come to Scotland is just about 8% of the £360 million fund. In a recent session of FMQs, I highlighted to the First Minister that 9% of the value of fish landed in the UK comes through Shetland ports. And in 2024, Shetland was responsible for 88% of Scottish total mussel production, and shellfish aquaculture is earmarked for support from this fund too. But let's remember why this fund has become available. It follows the botched Conservative Brexit deal and Labour's disastrous 12-year deal, which Scottish Fishermen's Federation said is, and I quote, an absolute disastrous outcome for Scotland's fishing fleet. The UK Government should look again at the way it allocates money through the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund. Some of our islands and coastal communities are economically fragile, and both governments should be supporting the whole economic ecosystem, recognising the national contribution of our fishing and seafood sector. My MP colleague Alistair Carmichael, as Chair of the House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, was informed last week in a meeting of that committee that there were requests for the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund to be devolved. This has led to the Barnett formula being put into practice, hence the disparity in percentages coming to Scotland, despite our importance in the overall UK fishing sector. Shetland and Scotland's fishing fleets deserve better backing from the devolved government, but I also urge the UK Government to look again at a fairer package of funding. This afternoon, Scottish Liberal Democrats will support the Conservative amendment opposing the Murray Firth Flow Park due to local concerns and the possible impact on local fishing, and we urge meaningful discussions with local stakeholders about the project. We will not support the Labour amendment, which rewrites the motion, although we agree with the position that the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund should not have been devolved without first agreeing a mechanism outside of the Barnett formula. We're also calling for a policy that better reflects the size and value of the Scottish industry. The UK Government should have sought a better answer to the situation that we now find ourselves in. To conclude, Presiding Officer, island and coastal communities will be all too well aware that the Scottish Government in this parliamentary session has not allowed for enough conversation in this place to speak about all that impacts the fishing sector. Indeed, this afternoon's debate has been cut to accommodate other business. The significance of fishing to Scotland's economy and coastal communities will be well understood by voters in those areas. A cynic might suggest that the Scottish Government has just remembered this now that an election is looming. I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wishart. And we now move to the open debate. I would advise members there's no time in hand, and therefore any intervention should be absorbed within the members' agreed speaking time. And with that, I call Alistair Allen to be followed by Douglas Lumpton. Up to 6 minutes, please.
My Western Isles constituency can, of course, boast a long and proud fishing heritage. If you see a fishing vessel with an SY or CY registration, then she is likely to be one of the smaller, locally owned vessels that form the economic backbone of many communities from Lewis to Battersea. It would be fair to say that fishing communities across Scotland have faced challenging times, not least because of the empty promises made to them during the Brexit referendum and the low position accorded to fishing in the UK's negotiating priorities with Europe before and since then by successive Tory and Labour governments. Scottish fishing vessels have seen employment fall by some 15% between 2015 and 2024, and in the Western Isles the fishing sector has experienced a drop in employment by nearly a third, with 274 fishing jobs in 23-24 compared to 376 in 29-20. So, when I attended the annual general meeting of the Western Isles Fishermen's Association in Uist recently, it came as little surprise to hear fishers' reaction to the recent news that the UK Government intends to award less than 8% of the UK Coastal Growth Fund to Scottish fishing communities. Indeed, people's views on that subject at the meeting were made very clear to me by several people literally before I got in the door, and little wonder. The UK Labour Government's decision to give Scotland's fishermen 7.78% of the UK's £360 million Coastal Growth Fund is justified by Labour on the basis that it represents Scotland's so-called Barnett share. That is to say, the figure is reached by looking at Scotland's share of the UK electorate, not on our share of UK fish landings, as previous allocations have been. It's difficult to see, despite some of the arguments on offer today, it is difficult to see how any UK government who'd thought about it could really see the justification for moving away from the counting of fish to the counting of people as the basis for such allocations. Indeed, the difference between the two calculations, Presiding Officer, is pretty enormous, given that some 70% by tonnage of the fish landed in the UK in 2023 were landed in Scotland. The £166 million, or 46% share of the funding that was sought by the Scottish Government on the basis of previous precedent, was ignored by the UK in favour of a Barnett-based share, which gives Scotland only £28 million. So the UK Labour Government's decision has directly cost Scotland's fishing communities, including those in my own constituency, some £138 million. And this is before we open up the question about how much Scotland previously received from the EU funding pre-Brexit. I will indeed.
Rhoda Grant.
Would it not have been wiser of the Scottish Government to negotiate a formula for devolving this money before they asked for it to be devolved, rather than express surprise that it was devolved using the only formula that is available for devolving money?
Alistair Allen.
Well, I thank the member for intervening, because it gives me the opportunity to say this. I am surprised that the argument that Labour has made in its amendment today, and I am surprised, or rather I would hope that this Parliament would not attempt to justify cuts by the UK Government on this scale. And although I note with respect the contortions that the Labour amendment goes through today in an attempt to do exactly that, and to pick up on the point the member mentions, the Labour position seems to be that the UK Government has withheld money in this way because the Scottish Government should, using constitutional powers it does not enjoy, somehow have insisted in advance that it didn't do it. I'm afraid that's a pretty feeble argument to put forward, and it's one that won't be very convincing to the fishing communities affected. Indeed, the £138 million that's now been lost to projects in Scotland to modernise our fishing fleet, equip vessels with new technology, train new generations of fishers, boost the seafood sector and support the wider local economy of fishing communities, amongst other things, is what will be missed. And I want also to say that it takes quite a brass neck, as I think the Labour amendment takes us down this road, it takes quite a brass neck to suggest that Scotland should now look to find this money from its own remaining resources to make up for what has been denied to us by the UK Government. And it's an even brasser neck, if that's a phrase that I can use. It's an even brasser neck to suggest that the UK Government should then be exonerated for all blame for the situation that has arisen. But I hope that's an argument that this Parliament will see through this evening and act accordingly. Presiding Officer, all the evidence tells us that the UK has never viewed Scotland's fishing industry as important, not now, nor at any point since the 1970s, when they described the industry as expendable. The £138 million which the UK has now taken from Scotland's fishing communities is but the latest example of that, and we should have no hesitation in calling it out, or to stand up for the communities for whom, by any reasonable person's reckoning, it must surely be intended.
Thank you, Dr Allen. I now call Douglas Lumsden to be followed by Karen Adam. Mr Lumsden, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, President Officer. Let me begin by saying that Scotland's fishing industry is one of the great pillars of our coastal and island communities. It is a sector that provides renewable, climate-smart food, supports thousands of jobs, anchors local communities, prevents rural depopulation and is woven into the cultural identity of places all around our coast. And I welcome a debate on fishing. But it should not escape notice that this is the first government-led debate on fishing in more than 2 years. Only after repeated calls from the Scottish Conservatives has this government finally turned its attention to a sector it claims to champion. If the Scottish Government truly cared about fishing communities, they wouldn't have waited years for a government-led debate on fishing to come to this chamber. Now, Presiding Officer, let me be clear. We agree with the principles in the SNP motion today. Of course, Scotland deserves a fair share of UK funding. The Labour government has shown a complete disregard to that. Of course, we want strong fishing opportunities and a sustainable future for the fleet. Nobody disputes that. But the motion deliberately ignores a very uncomfortable truth. The SNP's record on supporting Scotland's fishermen is one of confusion, contradiction and neglect. This is the same government that tried to impose HPMAs, a plan so detached from coastal reality that they were forced to scrap it after an overwhelming backlash. This is the same government whose officials advised ministers to dismiss concerns about spatial squeeze, telling them not to mirror the language of industry, despite the Scottish Fishermen's Federation warning that sector risks being crushed by competing demands on our seas. And this is the same government still proposing new restrictions across 19 sites in the latest consultations. Presiding Officer, it's a disgrace, because the Cabinet Secretary cannot stand here today talking about supporting fishing communities while their own planning decisions, their own budget cuts and their own policy proposals undermine those very same communities. And the SNP's ambition to rejoin the European Union, and with it the dreaded common fishery policy, something that was applauded by their backbenchers today, is perhaps the clearest example of all. After decades of Scottish frustration under the CFP, after regaining control over 25% of catching opportunities post-Brexit, after incomes have risen significantly, we now have a First Minister who believes returning to the CFP would be part of Scotland's national mission. Well, Presiding Officer, that mission would hammer Scotland's fleet, and Scotland's fishing communities know it. But let me also address UK Labour's government's role. The Labour-EU trade agreement, extending EU access for 12 years, has rightly been described as a total capitulation by the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. At the same time, as noted in the SNP motion today, Labour scrapping ring-fence funding for fisheries and allocating Scotland just 7.78% of a £360 million growth fund, despite Scotland landing more than half of UK's catch, is a disgrace, something that Rhoda Grant tried to defend today. She's trying to defend the indefensible. So we have both of Scotland's governments fail in this sector. Labour selling out access and shortchanging the Scottish fishing sector. The SNP attacking fishing from the domestic side, want to take us back into the dreaded CFP and prefer turbines over trawlers. No wonder communities feel squeezed from every direction. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Conservatives stand firmly with Scotland's fishing industry. We believe in sustainability and viability. We agree with the Scottish Fishermen Federation when they call for space at sea, not to be pushed aside by unplanned top-down development. And that's why our amendment today highlights the proposed Moray Firth Flow Park, a project that local communities and fishermen fear will reduce vital fishing grounds, threaten livelihoods and drive yet more spatial squeeze. Presiding Officer, this debate cannot ignore the scale of the spatial squeeze being driven by the SNP government's approach to offshore wind. Since 2022, ministers have approved 32 offshore wind projects, followed by another 12 in 2023 and a further 32 zones identified for future development, over 36 gigawatts of capacity. Now, when our party leader, Russell Finlay, was in Fraserburgh last week, he warned that Scotland's fishing industry cannot become a casualty of green energy obsession, and he is absolutely right. These irresponsible plans risk pushing fishermen out of their traditional grounds and jeopardising the future of our fleets and our stocks. I will give way.
Briefly, Karen Adam.
I do thank the member for giving way. The member often speaks about he talks up for the oil and gas sector and for our energy workers. Can I ask the member what his plans are for what happens after the decline in oil and gas? What then Douglas for a just transition for those workers? I'll tell you what, after our fishermen shouldn't be thrown at the side just to promote offshore wind. That's absolutely the wrong thing to do. So rather than bulldozing through historic fishing grounds, the government should be working with coastal communities to protect fishing as the renewable, climate-smart food source it is. The Scottish Government cannot claim to support fishing while allowing developments that directly undermine the sector. So let me put it plainly. We cannot prioritise offshore renewables over our fishing communities. There should not be any further consents for offshore wind developments until the impacts on our fishing sector are addressed in full, including financial compensation for losses to ensure that the fleet remains viable and profitable. And we cannot ignore the voices of over 600 people who turned up to Findhorn the other night. We need to listen.
Presiding Officer, Scotland's fishermen deserve more than warm words. They deserve clarity, consistency and real support. Our amendment strengthens this debate, highlighting a key issue of concern to communities across the North East, and time will tell if the other parties have the bottle to stand up for our fishing communities.
Thank you. I now call Karen Adam to be followed by Karen Mochan. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate, because if you stand at any of the harbours in my constituency of Banffshire and Buchan Coast, you'll see what this debate really is about. Boats landing, crews coming off after a really hard shift, as always, and processors getting ready to work, with markets already bustling. Now, that is my constituency, helping to feed this nation and beyond. And that is not just an industry that is economically vital. It is, yes, but it's also a part of who we are along the coast. Fishing is the culture, it's the identity and the daily life for our communities. The sea also giving us life, but often taking it away. And I pay tribute to those lost working in our vital industry. Presiding Officer, I am shocked at the UK Government's decision to allocate Scotland just £28 million out of £360 million for the Fishing Coastal Growth Fund. And I can't say that I'm actually surprised, though. Giving Scotland around 8% of the pot for a Scottish fishing industry that accounts for over 60% of the UK's total fishing capacity is exactly the sort of thing that we've come to expect from any London-based government. Scotland is never at the top of their list, and our fishing industry is never prioritised. Scotland has been handed an 83% cut, while England's proportionately smaller fishing industry walks away with over £300 million. Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson, doesn't matter who's in number 10. The colour of the party changes, but the message to my coastal communities stay the same. You're expendable. England's industry will always top Scotland's as a priority for Westminster, and that's no matter how much we contribute. Funding should follow the fish, and it should follow the fleet, and it should follow the jobs, and it certainly should not be based on a population number scribbled on a spreadsheet hundreds of miles away from our harbours. I condemn this decision. It's damaging, it's wholly unfair, and I join the Scottish Government in calling for the UK Government to reverse it. I will.
I completely agree with the member on this, actually. I think it is absolutely disgraceful what Labour have done. But does she accept this point that we keep coming back to, that the SNP's stated policy is to go back into the common fisheries policy, and that will cause even more damage than what Labour are doing?
Adam.
I was waiting for that comment. I do thank the member for that intervention. But really, we need to stop pointing at bogeymen in the room that aren't there at the moment. What the Conservatives have done to the fishing industry in Scotland was utter, absolute betrayal and nothing short of it. And they sit there pointing the finger and no, you can shout from your central position all you want, but you know the damage that, sorry, through the chair, they know the damage that Brexit has done to our fishing industry, and no matter how much finger pointing they do, they can't get away from it. Folk in Fraserburgh, Peterhead, Macduff, Buckie, they know that the work they do is valued, and it should be. In this Parliament, in our Parliament, it is valued, even if it's not clearly understood or valued in the London one. And this isn't just about the boats that do the catching, it's about the processors in our local communities, the factories that keep the local economy moving, turning that catch into world-class seafood. Now, those processors are often the biggest workplaces in our towns, and when this kind of funding is cut, it's those processors, those workers, and ultimately the communities that pay that price. And this is why the landing obligations and the strengthened economic link rules brought in by this Scottish Government are important. They have already started to shift more Scottish fish into Scottish ports and into Scottish processors. And this is what happens when decisions are taken here with Scottish jobs in mind. Processors in my constituency tell me that they have capacity for more. They can invest in new kit and new markets, but they have to be sure that the fish and the workforce will be there. The Scottish Government is doing what it can with the powers that it has, investing through Marine Fund Scotland and using the economic link to keep more value here, and I do welcome that. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for listening to the fishers and processors and agreeing to meet with me to discuss that further. But we cannot ignore that damage that Brexit has done to this sector and the way both the Conservatives and now Labour have treated rural Scotland as a whole. The Tories lined it all up and called it a sea of opportunity, and Labour have chosen to own that project and carry it on. Presiding Officer, there's a clear pattern here. The power, the money and the decision-making all sit in London. Regardless of which party is in charge, Westminster has never shown that it is willing to put Scotland's fishing industry or our interests first, certainly not rural Scotland. If we want stable investment, a fair funding share and an economic system that actually fits our needs, then we have to be honest about what is required. We can and must fight for the best possible deal within this union, and this motion is a part of that fight. But the long-term answer is independence, giving the ability to design funding that follows our fleet, to negotiate directly for our coastal economy. Presiding Officer, rural Scotland feeds this nation, but Westminster starves it of fair funding and fair treatment that it deserves. And this is why we need Scottish independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Adam. Can I remind members they are perfectly permitted to ask for intervention. It's up to the person on their feet whether they give that intervention, and that is not an invitation to shout the intervention from a sedentary position. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by Douglas Ross. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start with a quote from my colleague Rhoda Grant, who has said before in this chamber, "We all know that fish know no boundaries, and because of that, negotiations have always taken place on fisheries." And I think this is a very good place to start my contribution, because if we are going to help and to protect the future of our fishing industry, we must in this place learn to negotiate and, of course, work together. It seems to me that the Chamber wants to, not just wants to, actually believes we need to support this industry, and how we work together will make a great deal of a difference. The Government motion recognises the need for continued investment to build a thriving, sustainable and modern fishing industry, which is of key importance to Scotland's island and coastal communities and, of course, to the wider economy. And I think that we all want to work towards that. Across the UK, we are deeply fortunate to live in a spectacular and unique island furnished with an incredible coastline that for centuries has provided us with food, employment and leisure. The environmental wealth that is present across Scotland's coast is abundant, and without it, our entire culture would be altogether different. I am immensely thankful for that, and from speaking to my constituents, I know that it's perhaps the thing that they love and value most about the South Scotland region. And this is why I speak today in this debate. My constituents love the history of the coastal and fishing industry, they love the environment it functions within, and they enjoy the chance to improve their towns and economy, which comes with such an industry. But of course, I recognise the industry has had complex difficulties over many years with quotas, funding across the UK, with Brexit and other worldwide matters which are often turbulent. The fishing industry does deserve some stability. I think we can all agree that, and it's working together that might get that. The fishing sector in South Scotland, of course,
I appreciate Carol Mochan giving way and absolutely agree that the government should work together. But a question is, where were the UK Government Scottish Office, the Secretary of State for Scotland, when it came to identifying a sensible mechanism to set the funding budget that this motion for the SNP government brought forward today? They were absolutely lacking.
Carol Mochan.
I thank the member for that intervention, and I think it's fair to say that we need to think about what happened. And you will know that my colleague Torco Crichton, the MP for the Western Isles, also has spoken to the Labour government in the UK. And I think that's what we need to talk about, is what is it that we can do to move forward rather than just fighting across this chamber. The fishing sector in South Scotland, while a small, of course.
Cabinet Secretary, briefly.
I want to thank Carol Mochan for taking the intervention, but would the member appreciate that we have wanted those discussions to take place on behalf of a Scottish Government perspective, but when the interministerial groups are the only forums that we have that have been cancelled and not taken place for the past 6 months, those discussions with the UK Government become increasingly difficult. So it's certainly not for lack of trying on the Scottish Government's part.
Carol Mochan.
Thank you, President Officer. I really appreciate the Cabinet Secretary's intervention. And of course, I understand I am an opposition party. I understand how difficult it is to get time with the government of the day. So we do need to keep moving forward. We do need to keep talking. The fishing sector in the South Scotland, while a smaller part of the overall Scottish industry compared to major hubs like Peterhead and Fraserburgh in the North East, it is a vital component of the coastal and rural communities of my region. I want to also mention that my constituents believe, as we move forward, in order to maintain that environmental wealth we have in the environmental wealth we have in the south of Scotland, we have to begin to see the coast as a delicate ecosystem with varied needs and challenges, from erosion to the loss of seagrass to the changes that the fishing industry bring. We do need a thriving coastline to preserve not just the local environment, but the environment of our whole country. And that boost to the economy we know that these communities need. And of course, this is a weighty responsibility, and why it is really important that this chamber takes the time to be very serious, and again, it gives us reason to work together. If I can return to the economy directly, as others have said, I'm not going to restate the figures that the Cabinet Secretary gave us, just to say that we know that the industry gives us large amounts of landing, it gives us large amounts of jobs. And it is important that we work with that industry to make sure that we do continue. In terms of employment, fisheries employed over 20,000 people in Scotland, and that's so important because it's part of our rural and coastal communities, as others have said. But we know that the employment has fallen by 15%, and I think we need to talk about what we can do now. Presiding Officer, I only have 38 seconds left. I wanted to just go in about what we need to do. I reiterate, we must work together, but I think we must pay attention to some of the things that we can do here in Scotland in our devolved capacity. What will make the difference now, here? We need to look at sustainability. We know that from what other members have said. And we need to make sure that we use the science that we can, that the Labour motion mentions, and I hope that that can be supported. Because without that science, without that move towards that, we may find that we cannot keep the seas sustainable. During this parliamentary session, we have had much greater emphasis, mostly from the opposition members, but I reiterate my gratitude today for people to work together, participate in the debate and hopefully change the trajectory. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call Douglas Ross to be followed by Emma Harper. Up to 6 minutes. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to contribute to this important debate about our fishing sector and fishing industry, and I think it is regrettable it's taken 2 years for the government to bring this forward in their time. And maybe it's because the government don't have much positive to say about fishing here in Scotland. They've got a lot of complaints about other parties and other parliaments, but not about what they can do here in Scotland, and indeed what they would do. Because one of the telling points of this debate is the reiteration from the Cabinet Secretary that the SNP policy is to take our fishermen back into the common fisheries policy. Not only was that statement bad enough, she was applauded by her backbenches. Now, I wasn't surprised to see Hamza Youssef applauding, because he applauds anything. Remember when he was applauding a ferry being launched with painted-on windows? I was slightly more surprised to see the likes of Alistair Allen and Karen Adam and Emma Harper, supposedly representatives of coastal communities, applauding the fact that their party policy is to take the fishing industry back into the CFP. So let me ask the representatives from the SNP if... Oh, I don't know what's going on there. I hadn't even asked, and Emma Harper is throwing her arms up. So I'm just going to ask, and I'll give way to Emma Harper, if she can tell us what is positive for her fishermen to rejoin the common fisheries policy.
Emma Harper, briefly.
I'd like to respond to Douglas Ross. Thank you very much. I was throwing my arms up in the air because I wondered what you could say would be positive about Brexit.
Yes.
Douglas Ross.
Well, I'll try again. It wasn't a difficult question, so Alistair Allen wanted to intervene. So will Alistair Allen tell me what is positive for his fishermen to rejoin the common fisheries policy?
Alistair Allen.
The member may not quite understand that interventions work on the opposite principle to the one he understands, but nonetheless, will he accept that the reason that some of us, on this side of the chamber, people look forward to us being a member state of the European Union is that for the first time we will be represented in Europe by a government that actually puts fishing priorities to the top and not the bottom of our list of negotiating priorities.
Still no answer, so I'll give way to Karen Adams. She can tell us what is positive for her fishermen to rejoin the Common Fisheries Policy.
In the room at the table.
Yeah.
Sorry, since my microphone's on, I will come in and thank you, Presiding Officer. But I didn't press for an intervention, but Douglas Ross has demanded that I stand up and speak right now. I think that's a really inappropriate thing to do, first off. But I will say that you can't just be pointing the finger and asking people to stand up and jump in at your picky questions. We've already answered the question, and I answered the question earlier. So I'll ask the member if he can be a bit more respectful, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Just taking part in a debate, and a debate is to hear an exchange of views. And what people listening to this debate won't have heard is a positive reason to rejoin the Common Fisheries Policy from the very party who wants to go to the electorate to tell their fishermen that will be their policy. Vote for the SNP. If they ever get independence, they're going to take us back into the CFP, but they cannot tell us one single positive about rejoining the CFP. I think that is very, very telling. I've already taken 3 interventions, but didn't get any further with it. But I think people will look at that and will question why the SNP maintain this policy of rejoining the CFP if even their MSPs can't give one positive reason for doing so. But I want to use the rest of my remarks to focus on the Conservative amendment here today, and I welcome Tim Eagle lodging this amendment, which will send a very clear signal that this Parliament opposes the plans for the proposed Murray Firth Flow Park. These are plans that will decimate our local fishing sector. The Scottish Fishermen's Federation have been very clear on this. Elspeth MacDonald said in her speech just last month that the site between Findhorn and Burghead will create massive problems for the local fishing fleet, as it is positioned directly over established fishing grounds used for decades by inshore vessels that don't have the capacity to fish further afield. There was no consultation with our industry on these sites before the agreements were signed. And just last month, in the Northern Scot, a local fisherman was speaking to one of our local reporters, Lewis McBlain, and this fisherman said that the industry feels steamrolled by the lack of consultation for the Murray Firth Flow Park. They went on to say it would decimate many of the only fishing grounds on the Murray coast which are suitable for the area's small vessels if it was given the go-ahead. These are people whose livelihoods are at risk, and they continued, we're not against renewable energy, but it surely can't come at the cost of destroying traditional fishing grounds and the way of life that have been there for generations. I couldn't put it any better myself. This is fishermen who have fished these waters for years, who want to see their industry continue for years to come, who are worried about these proposals. And let's just look at who are proposing the Murray Firth Flow Park. The Offshore Solutions Group, a group that were feared to come to Murray and to listen to people invited along to Tim Eagle's public meeting and to listen in Nairn, because they said they felt unsafe. Well, I've been to many meetings in Murray. Not all of them have been particularly positive. They have always been robust but respectful. And I think Offshore Solutions Group did a great disservice to the people of Murray and Nairn by saying that they felt scared to come and listen to these concerns. They should be brave enough and bold enough to come along to hear the huge opposition from local fishermen and local communities. But if they won't come to Murray and to the Highlands to hear that message, then they should listen to the message from this Parliament. And tonight we can unite behind the Conservative motion to send the strongest possible signal that this Parliament does not support these plans, that we are on the side of the hundreds of people who attend these public meetings, the thousands who have already registered their objections, and the local fishermen who are worried about their future, which is why I ask every party to support our amendment tonight.
Thank you. I now call the final speaker in the open debate, Emma Harper. Up to 6 minutes. Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. While the big ports in the North East and Northern Isles may have the biggest landings and the biggest economic impact, I'd like to highlight the contribution to success of our fishing fleet in the South Scotland region, from Eyemouth to Portpatrick. It may be small compared to Lerwick or Peterhead, but we do pack a punch. Over 150 jobs in Dumfries and Galloway and the Borders are directly employed on Scottish registered vessels, and at the last count, nearly 7,000 tonnes of seafood was landed at the ports each year. The catch that lands every day at ports across the south is world-leading, high quality and sustainable. Kirkcudbright is one of the biggest harbours for scallop catch landings on these isles. And if you're out for your tea in a seafood restaurant and order the scallops, there's a fair chance it will have been caught in our inshore waters off the south west and landed in Kirkcudbright. West Coast Sea Products in Kirkcudbright has expanded from scallop fishing and supply and now sells its catch directly to locals and local businesses in the town and to the recently voted Restaurant of the Year at the D&G Life Awards, Swally and Scran in Kirkcudbright. So the industry isn't just about the boats and crew bringing in their catch, it's about the retailers and resellers dealing with outlets far and wide, and it's about the food outlets in the south and across Scotland and further afield taking that catch onto the plates and the dinner tables. Our offshore shellfish fleet is a crucial part of that mix and a part which provides skilled, well-paid jobs spread across rural areas, our coastal communities, rather than focused in one or two major ports. The economic benefit to Scotland is over £300 million, but the spin-offs in terms of our image and reputation overseas for high-end food and drinks are incalculable, and the jobs those bring to fragile rural economies are invaluable. So we need to ensure that we are training and supporting future generations entering the fishing industry. Colleagues have mentioned future workforce also. Organisations like the South of Scotland Seafish Training Association, run by my constituent Davy Gilchrist, are working hard to ensure that not only the current generation of fisherfolk have the skills needed at sea, but that also the next generation are shown how to crew the boats safely and efficiently and deal with emergencies and sea survival techniques also. That generation should also have fishing as a real option for their career. So I want to make a plea to careers advisors and skills development Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary to agree that we need to make sure crewing the fleet is on the table as an option for our young people seeking employment, not just in our coastal communities but across the sector, because keeping the fleet in action in ports like Kirkcudbright is supporting jobs in rural communities, boosting our local economies and so supporting repopulation. Yes, I'll give way to Finlay Carson.
Briefly, Finlay Carson.
I thank Emma Harper for giving way, and I absolutely 100% agree with everything that she said up to now. But would the member agree with me that her support for the absolute disastrous HPMA proposals that her government brought forward, and also the lack of advancement of the fisheries like the cockles, are doing the industry in our region a great disservice?
Emma Harper.
So, thank you, Finlay Carson, for that intervention. The government hasn't taken forward HPMA, so that is part of they've listened and decided not to take that forward. Presiding Officer, I want to support the communities. I want to support repopulation. Fishing is a fundamental part of our culture and our history, and to see it die for lack of new starts would be a tragedy. So it is a slap in the face for all who work in the industry to see the UK Government allocate such a pitiful slice of a fund, less than 8%, given that Scotland's contribution is greater than 60%. The funding should be going to the coastal communities who are landing catches that contribute so much to our economy and to our global reputation for quality food. Of course, and the members across chamber won't be thanking me for reminding them that the voters of their role in this and the fact that the fund has to exist under UK control at all is a product of Brexit, a Brexit that this country, a Brexit that Scotland voted against but were forced to thole anyway. Thankfully, our seafood and fishing sector are made of stern stuff and have adapted, and they have had to survive and thrive. But the crocodile tears from both the Tories and the Labour benches, the former with the amendment that talks about negative impacts on the fishing sector, when their actions hammered what they called an expendable industry over recent years. The latter acting as the human shield for the most unpopular UK Prime Minister in polling history, shouldn't stand when it comes to decision time. And roll on the day when Scotland takes its seat at the EU as an independent member, getting the fair funding our fishing industries deserves, shaking off the dead hand of Westminster, fiddling the figures and standing up for our own communities in Europe as compared to the decades of decline of successive UK governments allowing this to happen on their watch. Finally, Presiding Officer, I will address the CFP issue that Douglas Ross brought up. I'd be interested to know who's been negotiating on behalf of Scotland for previous governments. Scotland has not been at the table. Scotland Scotland needs to be in the room at the table, standing up for our own fishing communities ourselves, Presiding Officer, because we know our communities in Scotland. We need to be in the room at the table for the negotiating ourselves on our behalf. And I hope that answers Douglas Ross's question about the CFP, Presiding Officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move to closing speeches. I would note that Mr Lumsden, who participated in the debate, is not here. I will expect an explanation for that as well as an apology. And I call Beatrice Wishart up to 6 minutes. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think we can agree that this has been an interesting and at times lively debate this afternoon, demonstrating just how both complex and valued the sector is. In my motion in the members' debate I held earlier this year, I highlighted many issues: climate change, warmer seas and stocks moving to new areas, marine pollution, ghost gear and dumping at sea and its impact on fish, seabirds, cetaceans and other marine life, food security, increasingly important in the unstable world in which we live, increasing demand for marine space, spatial squeeze, at-sea renewable energy infrastructure, as other members have raised this afternoon, pushing fishing out of traditional grounds, marine protection, the dangerous actions of other fishing vessels at sea, the impact of policy making without up-to-date scientific evidence and data, the trade and cooperation agreement negotiations. I've long raised concerns about the level of Scottish Government investment in its Marine Directorate, and I think the Rural Affairs and Islands Committee visit to their premises in Aberdeen, as Finlay Carson and Rhoda Grant have highlighted, shocked us at what we actually saw. And I believe it's inadequately resourced for all that is being asked of it: fisheries protection, marine protection, scientific research and data gathering, all for future policy making. Fishermen are custodians of our seas, and the last things they want to see is the loss in biodiversity or low stock numbers of fish species that can never recover. Their way of life is dependent on accurate scientific data, and the Scottish Government needs to ensure that we get that right. If we don't, and there are huge concerns about the proposed cuts to the pelagic and cod quotas, the impact on island and coastal communities will be devastating. Be in no doubt that there will be serious consequences. If there are no vessels at sea catching fish, there will be no need onshore for a processing sector, and the impact on all those communities will be felt throughout the whole wider supply chain that relies on the fishing boats, many of which are family businesses. I note Scottish Environment Link's call for decentralisation of fisheries and conservation management to allow for more inclusive and locally appropriate decision-making. Shetland's location would lend itself to local rather than regional management to avoid a one-size-fits-all approach. Indeed, Shetland is already ahead with local management, in that the Shetland Islands Regulated Fisheries Scotland Order, run by the Shetland Shellfish Management Organisation, has been working well for nearly 25 years, and it should be held up as an exemplar. Shetland Fishermen's Association have highlighted the impact of delays in confirmation to sea fish of the Marine Fund Scotland Award for fisheries training. The optimum time for attracting school leavers and getting new entrants is June, and any delay in funding confirmation means that critical time frame is lost. This has happened for the second year in a row, and as the Cabinet Secretary knows from my correspondence with her, it's important that bureaucracy should not get in the way of and be the detriment to bringing new entrants into the industry. And I welcome Emma Harper's comments about the fishing as a career and all that can be done with skills development. Without the proper investment in the next generation of fishermen, we can't guarantee a sustainable fishing sector for the future. And as I've pointed out, that could be disastrous to communities around Scotland. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, in the last few years, the Scottish Government has thrown at the fishing community highly protected marine areas, or HPMAs, which look to be an existential crisis for the sector as we know it. Revelations that the First Minister was told not to engage with the very real issue of spatial squeeze in our seas, the economic link policy, delays in providing a training scheme which helps develop the future of the sector, and even the loss of annual debates in the Scottish Parliament. Finally, It would be remiss of me not to mention again the disastrous Conservative Brexit deal for the fishing sector and the UK Labour Party's damaging extension of that deal until 2038. And finally, I would just give a plug to two businesses in my constituency who have had awards recently. Island Fish have been celebrating an award for delivering quality from sea to plate. And Frankie's Fish and Chip Shop has won another award. I feel I couldn't speak about fishing without mentioning those. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Wisher. I now call Ariane Burgess up to 6 minutes. Point of order, Douglas Lumsden.
Presiding Officer, I'd just like to apologise to yourself and to the Chamber for not being here at the start of closing speeches.
Thank you, Mr Lumsden. I now call Ariane Burgess up to 6 minutes. Ms Burgess.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate has seen a lot of good points raised and has been extremely lively and tense at times. But I hope that communities and fishers watching the proceedings today will have some reassurance in the knowledge that we are doing all that we can do from different perspectives to put pressure on the UK Government to change course. We heard a number of contributions from members, and I really appreciate Alistair Allen's point around the loss of the millions of pounds via this settlement that would have supported fishing for the future, especially in the Western Isles, but also across Scotland. Karen Adams and Rhoda Grant both paid tribute to the fishers who work in an extraordinarily challenging environment, and again, funding support to put the infrastructure in place that needs to support them through that work is really important. Emma Harper also went on to talk about the necessary need for funding to support our future fisheries, to get new entrants into the sector. And I agree with Carol Mocken's point that the fishing sector absolutely needs certainty going on to the future. Yes.
Emma Harper, briefly.
Thank you very much for giving way. I'd just like to hear Ariane Burgess's thoughts that the average age of a fisherman is, or a fisher person is 56. So that's why I mentioned the need for investment in training.
Ariane Burgess.
I thank the member for that point. Having met with a skipper on a Shetland vessel who is in his 50s, saying to me he doesn't know who's going to be taking the vessel on after he retires is very concerning. Presiding Officer, the UK Government's decision to underfund Scotland's fisheries is a shocking example of how our fishers are being exploited and mistreated by Westminster. But we must also acknowledge that this situation isn't playing out in a vacuum. Getting the funding Scotland is due is an important element if we're to have sustainable marine futures. Equally important to this aim is having a regulatory system in place that both protects stocks and supports a diverse fleet that forms the backbone of Scottish coastal communities for the long term. And that's the key thing I want to get across today, that fishing is inseparable from the marine environment. Without solid foundations for healthy ecosystems above and below the waves, fisheries and those who rely on them cannot thrive. Unfortunately, at the present moment, we don't have a solid foundation. We have a marine planning system that doesn't properly deal with fishing. Scientific research is being underfunded and even sidelined by economic interests. Quota is being gifted to a small number of very large operators, some of whom land their catch abroad. And with this system in place, is it any wonder that cod, one of our most iconic species, is on the brink? Can we be surprised that the number of vessels has fallen 16% since 2015, with jobs disappearing as a result? To reverse stock declines and restore jobs, we need to have a better way of doing things. The UN Development Goal 14, Life Underwater, sets the vision for sustainable fishing. And this means having a marine directorate that is guided by science and manages our seas with the long-term health of fish stocks and communities in mind. It means having clearly defined spaces so that we can have zones for habitat regeneration, others for low-impact fishing, and places where bottom-towed gear can occur. It means allocating quota in a transparent way which adheres to the criteria that includes environmental, social and economic factors. It means subsidising those who operate responsibly and coming down hard on those who seek to exploit our seas, no matter the cost. By having a long-term vision that everyone can align with, we can put wild-caught fish on a sustainable pathway for the future and create healthy, living communities. Sustainable seas create sustainable populations. meaning we can address the blight of depopulation that's hurting coastal communities across the Highlands and Islands. To really get these communities thriving, we must give them an active stake in the governance of inshore areas. That way, the needs of all marine users can be met. Fishers, marine tourism businesses and other recreational users can be at sea in harmony. A potential way of turning this vision into a reality is to explore the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority model that's used in England. This brings different stakeholders together and gives them the power to set bylaws in their region. While by no means perfect, I believe it's a great starting point. It decentralises the system, which can only aid transparency. It also supports greater collaboration between groups that are often pitted against one another. All of this is especially crucial when you consider that Scotland is going to be on the forefront of the climate crisis. As I pointed out to the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action, scientists are becoming extremely agitated that the Gulf Stream is increasingly likely to collapse this century. This vital ocean current passes right through our abundant seas off the West Coast. To be prepared for such an event, to ensure that we can mitigate the impact on coastal communities and be in a position to adapt, we must start ensuring our seas are as healthy as they can be. To wrap up, I'd like to call on the Scottish Government to commit to a system that respects the science, sets out distinct fishing zones that enable both marine ecosystems and communities to thrive, supports fishers, particularly those using low-impact methods, fairly distribute quota, and put community decision-making at the heart of inshore regulation. If we can achieve this, I believe we can ensure thriving seas and coastal communities up and down the coast of Scotland.
Thank you, Ms Burgess. I now call Mercedes Villalba. Similarly, up to 6 minutes. Ms Villalba.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Unusually, I haven't pre-prepared a speech for this evening because I've been asked to close for Labour. I wanted to listen to the debate and to speak to the points that were raised. In that note, then, I think it's important that I start with the reason for today's debate. The Scottish Government have brought forward this motion supporting Scotland's fishing industry. The motion seems to focus solely on the allocation that has been made under the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, which is disproportionate to the size and value of Scotland's fishing industry. I understand why the Scottish Government has chosen this issue for their debate today, but I think it is surprising that after so many years, what used to be an annual debate is only now just coming forward, and it seems to only now be coming forward in response to this issue. It's a real issue, it's right that we debate it, but I would have thought that the Scottish Government's priority would be to use the Scottish Parliament's time to discuss and debate issues of which the Minister has responsibility for. And we heard during this evening's debate from Beatrice Wishart that I think she said it was February this year was the first time that the fishing industry had debate time in the Scottish Parliament for quite a while, and I know that the Conservative Party used their business a few weeks ago for this issue, and Tim Eagle made that point again today. And so I think I just would like to reiterate that point that's been made cross-party, that we do need time for fishery debates in Parliament, and we need, and I hope the Scottish Government will bring forward debate time on the issues that they haven't included in their motion, the issues for which they are responsible for, to hear more. I mean, the Minister's opening speech had a lot of detail. It was very dense. I think I'd have to go back and read the official report to get all the detail. But I didn't think I heard any specific commitment for how the Scottish Government will be supporting the processing sector, what it's looking to do around marine spatial planning. And these are all, I think, crucial issues that warrant debate time. Beatrice Wishart pointed out that the fund itself, the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, should not have been devolved without first agreeing to a proportionate calculation. The disproportionate nature of it is being raised, as my colleague Rhoda Gran and Carol Mochan noted. It is being raised by Labour MPs, and I heard from the Minister herself that she's also raising it directly with the UK Government. I heard Mary Goujon's frustrations about the interministerial groups. It's regrettable, I think, that so much Scottish Parliament debate time is having to be spent discussing intergovernment, intergovernment relations. Obviously, I think any fishers watching the debate want to hear the practical measures that our parties and our governments will do to support them. And so I think that is a shame that situation. Well, I'll take Mr Carson's first.
Finlay Carson, briefly.
I thank the member given way, but it would appear to be that the member suggesting that it serves Scotland right that they asked for fishing, the fund to be devolved, and they got what they deserved, and they didn't realise that it would be completely unfair. Even Rhoda Grant suggests it was unfair. Surely the Scottish Government in Scotland, I beg your pardon, at the UK Government Scottish Office, should have realised it was totally unfair.
Mercedes Vialba.
I don't think anyone is saying what Mr Carson's just said. I think the point is that when a fund is devolved, there are procedures in place for that to happen, and it wouldn't be right for the Scottish Office to intervene in intergovernmental negotiations. I see the member shaking his head, but I think there's definitely a way forward, but I don't think it serves any of our communities to be pointing the finger at one another. I've said, and members on these benches have recognised, the fund has been allocated in a way that's disproportionate. What I haven't heard is any contrition or acknowledgement that the Scottish Government has let our communities down here by not having the foresight. It's very easy in hindsight to criticise a decision that's been made, but really I think our communities have the right to expect the Scottish Government to have their head in the game. So I hope that we're going to hear from the Minister in her closing how we can work together, given the unanimous support across the chamber for the fishing industry. I don't think we're going to get a unanimous result on tonight's motions and amendments, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to discuss and work together outside of this debate. But I think that does start with respect for one another during debate. And just today, I think every member received a revised, updated code of conduct from the presiding officer. I was disappointed to see one member use his contribution to make personal attacks to members of other parties and to use his time to goad members. I don't think that serves our constituents or the issue at hand. I know the Minister wants to intervene. I'm sorry, I've seen that I've run out of time, so I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Vialba. I now call Finlay Carson up to 7 minutes. Mr Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to speak not only about figures and funding allocation, but about the people behind Scotland's fishing industry. A healthy selection of whom we welcome to the gallery today. This has never been a debate that should divide us politically. Traditionally, it has united us because at its heart are the men and the women who go to sea, risking their lives in one of the most dangerous working environments on earth. They face unprecedented seas, brutal weather and constant reality that one mistake could cost them everything. Fishing is not simply about numbers on a balance sheet. It's about fathers, mothers, sons and daughters who leave home knowing that safety is never guaranteed. They do this not for themselves alone, but to put food on our tables and to sustain the communities that depend on them. When we talk about fairness and support, we must remember this. Every fisherman who goes to sea deserves to come home safe, every single time. And along with that, we must tackle the mounting pressures that threaten the very future of their livelihoods. But on to the motion. Well, the UK Government, Labour Government, who already don't understand farming with their hated farm tax, now clearly show they don't understand fishing with a decision to allocate Scotland just £28 million from a £360 million Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, a mere 7.8%. We heard from all others, including Alistair Allen, everybody except the Labour benches, and given that Scotland accounts for over 60% of the landings, 63% of UK waters, and the majority of seafood exports, this allocation ignores all those realities. It is not just unfair, and even Rhoda Grant believes it's unfair, it's damaging. It undermines confidence, investment and the resilience of our coastal communities. Under previous arrangements, Scotland received 46% of fishing funding. This was proportionate. It was fair. This settlement is neither. I'll give way to Rhoda Grant briefly.
I'm sure Finlay Carson understands the Barnett formula and how funds are devolved to Scotland. Would he and his party not have first ensured that the formula was right before asking for the funds to be devolved? A UK-wide fund would have meant that Scottish fishers would have had an equal chance at getting to the fund, but instead they wanted it devolved before they knew the mechanism by which it would be devolved.
Finlay Carson.
I would have thought that the Labour Minister for Scotland would have ensured that Scotland got a fair deal, and that was sadly lacking. But funding is not just part of the story. Our fishing industry is under pressure from every direction. Spatial squeeze, as raised by Tim Eagle and others. Spatial squeeze from offshore wind developments and marine conservation zones, often imposed without proper consultation or compensation. And there's no doubt that the SNP put turbines over trawlers, in the words of Douglas Lumsden. And spatial squeeze is likely to result in the policy of Ariane Burgess and our extreme Green Party Butte House agreement on HPMAs, bringing in arbitrary limits on fishing without any scientific basis. The Green Plan would mean fish for the rich and not fish for all. Market uncertainty raising fuel costs and regulatory complexity and unjustified delays in Scottish Government marine planning policy. It's a bit like developing agricultural policy. This delay makes it harder for businesses to plan and invest. Uncertainty and doubt around stock assessments. Now, I agree with Beatrice Wishart that this is the direct result of SNP government's decade-long underfunding of science, which has seen the once leading organisation that was the Marine Scotland, now the Marine Directorate, decline beyond recognition. There's a lack of trust, a lack of direction. Science needs and should be behind every demand for tough decisions, and at the moment it's not. We've had disastrous international negotiations, as raised by Tim Eagle, that too often leave Scotland shortchanged on quota opportunities. Labour's so-called reset with Europe is another Labour disaster. Instead of restoring leverage through annual negotiations after 2026, Labour has locked Scotland into a 12-year extension of EU access to our waters until 2038. That means no further quota gains, no flexibility and no ability to rebalance opportunities in favour of our fleet. The Labour government treating fishing as a bargaining chip in wider trade and security talks, with Scotland's interests sacrificed. It's yet another Labour sellout, and it will have a lasting consequence on our coastal communities, just like it would be if we were forced back into the CFP. We heard not one good reason, despite Douglas Ross's efforts for the SNP, not one good reason to go back in. Presiding Officer, these pressures are real, and they're compounded by a narrative too often peddled by the likes of the Green Party that paints fishermen as environmental villains. That's wrong. Scotland's fishermen are not the problem, they're part of the solution. They are eager to embrace sustainability, to invest in low-impact gear, to support science-led management. But they need government to work with them, not against them. The Fishermen's Federation has been clear. We need certainty, stability and space to operate. That means securing the best possible fishing opportunities through annual negotiations and international agreements, a moratorium on further offshore wind consent until the impacts on fishing are fully assessed and compensated, investment in science and research because our seas are changing and decisions must be based on robust data, and a practical, workable catching policy that supports sustainability without strangling the sector. So let's be clear, food security matters. Polling shows that 86% of the public agrees that food production from Scotland's seas is as important as energy production. Fishing delivers renewable, healthy protein with far lower emissions than most other forms of food production. Fishing is part of Scotland's greener future, but only if we get the policy framework right. The industry is not standing still. It's modern, it's efficient and it's globally recognised. It wants to transition to a more sustainable practice. It wants to invest in low-impact gear. It wants to work with governments to protect marine habitats. But that transition requires support, not punitive measures. It requires funding, not token gestures. And as Tim Eagle mentioned, compensation when appropriate. and it requires trust, not constant suspicion. Finally, in the proposed Murray Firth Flow Park, let me be crystal clear. This development poses a serious threat to local communities and the fishing industry. We cannot allow renewable energy ambition to come at the expense of renewable food production. Scotland needs both, and that balance must be struck. So today, I urge everyone across the chamber to send a united message. Stand up for Scotland's fishermen. Demand a fair share of funding. Commit to policies that protect jobs, communities and maintain our ability to harvest healthy, sustainable seafood for generations to come. Presiding Officer, fishing is part of Scotland's identity, past, present and future. This is about fairness, it's about vision, and it's vital that the industry survives. It has for centuries, and it can do if we give it the support it needs.
Thank you. I now call Marie Goujon to wind up the debate. Cabinet Secretary, up to 9 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I have been, as ever, there's a lot to cover in the debate today, and I will try to get through as many of the issues that have been raised today as possible. But I really just want to thank members across the chamber for their speeches and for their interventions this afternoon, because I think just the range of views that we've seen expressed across the chamber today, I think reflects the importance of Scotland's fishing industry, not only to our economy, but our coastal communities and way of life. And I think this debate ultimately reminds us that fisheries negotiations aren't just about quotas and numbers. They're about livelihoods, they're about food, they're about sustainability and Scotland's role as a responsible steward of our marine resources. Now, throughout the negotiations, we will continue to take principled, robust positions based on the best available scientific information and also taking into account other factors too. Now, I look forward to continuing discussions with coastal state partners over the coming weeks, and I'm going to report back to Parliament on the conclusion of those negotiations in due course. Now, as ever, we have covered a wide range of topics today, again, which speaks to the complexity and diversity of our fishing industry and wider marine sector, but also just the sheer impact of the industry on constituencies right across Scotland. And I heard some really passionate contributions today from Beatrice Wishart, Karen Adam, Alistair Adam and more. And I just want to turn to some of the contributions today and also reflect on some of the amendments that have been put forward to the motion. Now, there was, first of all, I think much of what Tim Eagle said I agreed with, and also Finlay Carson during his interventions as well. Really just emphasising the importance of our sector, and I'm glad that there is agreement, I think, overall with the sentiment of the motion and what we tried to put forward today in seeking a fairer funding settlement for Scotland, for our fisheries and coastal communities in particular. But Tim Eagle also highlights through his amendment what I know is a really important matter in his region at the moment regarding the proposed Murray Flow Park. Now, just to say first and foremost, I absolutely acknowledge the public concerns that have been raised about the Flow Park proposals. Now, I know that no applications and assessments have yet been submitted to Scottish ministers for the construction of the project, but any specific proposal that could be taken forward would be subject to relevant required regulatory processes, which of course would also include a formal consultation, a public consultation as part of that. Now, the Marine Directorate Licensing Division is considering the regulatory requirements for activities involved in the storage and construction of turbines in the sea, and they are going to provide some clarity and guidance to all the interested parties as soon as possible. But I think what I would just want to emphasise is that these are the very early stages of the project, as I understand it. My officials are having regular meetings with the fishing industry in Crown Estate Scotland, and of course I will be closely monitoring progress on this matter. Yes.
Tim Eagle. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that. What I think we're trying to do today is, because this is difficult, isn't it? Because if you're too early, then people say you're too early. If you're too late and an application's in, we can't comment because there's an application in. So would the Cabinet Secretary join with me today and my colleagues today in sending that clear message to that actually this is the wrong location? Maybe there is a right location out there, but this is absolutely the wrong one, and that's what we're trying to get across today from the 600 people that were at my public meeting.
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, I completely appreciate the concerns that Tim Eagle and his colleagues have been raising in the chamber today, but I think my concern is I don't want to prejudice any procedures or any processes that would be gone through as a result of this. So, no, I won't take any more interventions, thank you. Now, turning to Rhoda Grant, who I normally do have a lot of sympathy with and would agree with, unfortunately not today, as I find myself just in complete and utter disbelief at some of the statements that have been made by Labour. Now, the Scottish Government has had long-standing devolved responsibility for fisheries, and while we were members of the EU, Scotland received 46% of the UK's EU fisheries funding, reflecting the size and importance of our industry. And since Brexit, the fisheries funding allocation to the Scottish Government has taken into account the size of Scotland's industry. So, therefore, it is simply not accurate to say that to devolve that funding equals that it must be done via the Barnett formula. Now, in our engagement with the UK Government ahead of their announcement on the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, we made clear on numerous occasions our expectations that we would continue to maintain an arrangement outside of the Barnett formula, which recognises the relative size and importance of fishing industries across the UK, and that Scotland should receive at least 46% of that fund. Now, UK ministers have ignored repeated requests to allocate fisheries funding using a fair and appropriate distribution method that adequately reflects the relative scale of the fishing industry in Scotland. Now, as part of the recent spending review, Treasury took the decision to baseline the existing fisheries funding arrangement with the devolved administrations, meaning we only receive Barnett consequentials on any subsequent changes to funding. Now, the decision to move away from an approach based on size and importance to the industry and move to the Barnett formula was one that was taken by the UK Government, and that was separate to our engagement on the fund. The UK Government have not provided an adequate rationale for this change to the funding model, and the approach that's been taken by the UK Government is also not in the spirit of the Memorandum of Understanding of the Fisheries Framework, which states that fisheries policy authorities will work together on the division and allocation of subsidies and grants in the UK. So the decision on the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund allocation has been done to us and not with us. Now, Rhoda Grant also talked about negotiations today, but negotiations involve discussions between two parties, potentially more. But it's hard for any negotiations to take place when the other party simply doesn't come to the table and simply doesn't respond. Our only forum of engagement hasn't met for about 6 months, and that's not for lack of trying on the Scottish Government's part. Now, I appreciate Carol Mochan, who took an intervention on this point in her contribution today, but by responding and suggesting it's just generally hard to get in touch and to get time with the UK Government, well, quite frankly, it shouldn't be, and I think it just shows the complete lack of respect and the complete disregard that this UK Government has for our country generally, let alone for the Scottish Government. Now, turning to some of the other contributions today, which I do want to touch on, and I have got a lot to get through. On Beatrice Wishart's amendment. Now, I absolutely understand the importance economically, socially and culturally of fishing to the Shetland Islands, and specifically regarding Shetland, our analysis shows that of the applications that we've had submitted to the Marine Fund Scotland to date from projects or individuals based there, that about 70% were awarded grant funding. Now, my fisheries officials were actually in Shetland a couple of weeks ago and heard firsthand some of the concerns that have been expressed by Beatrice Wishart in the Chamber today from the fishing community directly. And I know that they are continuing to discuss certain aspects of the fund with local fishing representatives. Now, I think it's also important to recognise too that significant amounts of the marine funding that we distribute are also awarded to projects that benefit the whole of Scotland. So when you consider, as an example of that, the £2.7 million to the Independent Observers Programme, providing data on fish stocks, as well as the £8.4 million which has been used to support Seafood Scotland's UK and EU UK and export market programme. Now, again, there were a number of critical points that were raised by Ariane Burgess that I hope to touch on today, and I think one of those was in relation to spatial planning, as she mentioned in her amendment. Now, we have been working, as members across the Chamber may be aware, on National Marine Plan 2, and it's the clear expectation for that plan to be used to implement this Government's priorities for the use of space, support growth of the marine economy and protection of the marine environment, as well as helping to reduce conflict from the competition for space. Now, we are currently exploring how the draft National Marine Plan 2 could respond to some of the issues that were raised in the consultation on the planning position statement, which we had published, including requests from some stakeholders for marine spatial planning and the implications that that might have for existing users. So I do expect to receive advice from officials on that soon, and potentially for the feasibility of marine spatial planning in the draft National Marine Plan. And that advice would also set out options for taking forward a spatial approach. But of course, any content of that draft plan, we would be into the next session before that would be considered. And finally, presiding officer, I think the Tories have been going really hard on the point of independence this afternoon, as if it's some secret that this government has been holding. Now, it's so secret, we published a paper on it called Our Marine Sector in an Independent Scotland. I think they might all like to read it, because I actually can't put it better than Emma Harper. As an independent country, we are in the room. It means we have a seat at the table, because one thing's for sure, we can't trust any UK government to do that for us or to act on our behalf. So in closing, presiding officer, Scotland's seafood is world class, and our fishers understand better than anyone the need to safeguard our seas for future generations. This government will continue to work in partnership with industry to navigate current challenges, seize the opportunities and deliver a thriving, sustainable and modern fishing sector. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on supporting Scotland's fishing industry. It's now time to move on to the next. I call Karen Adam for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On a point of order, earlier in the debate, Mr Douglas Ross shouted across the chamber at me, pointed at me and demanded that I stand up to answer him. I want to place on record that I found that behaviour unacceptable and disrespectful. And I want on record that I don't answer to Mr Ross, I answer to my constituents. And although I do not find Mr Ross intimidating in the very least, it may have been a very different scenario for another female MSP. Young women will be watching this. They will be watching our Parliament in this chamber and thinking that that is accepted here. I hope anyone watching at home with aspirations to be a parliamentarian will not be put off, and that they will be assured that we stand against all of that type of behaviour. This is a workplace, and this Parliament should be a safe and respectful environment for women and for all members. Can I ask whether such conduct is in line with the standards of behaviour you expect, and whether you will remind members that robust debate does not justify shouting at and physically gesturing towards colleagues in this way? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Adam. I have assumed the chair, and I'm unaware of the circumstances, but I would just say, of course, ordinarily, contributions that members make, the member's contribution is not a matter for the chair. But I would say, obviously, debate can be robust and passionate, but members at all times have a duty to conduct themselves in a courteous and respectful manner that enables everyone to contribute. And I would say whether or not to make or take interventions, of course, is a matter for the member too.